And then we'll also say, is SIEM the right investment? So I was working with Scott and Tim, and we probably had, I don't know, Scott, like 7 SIEM-related calls in the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks. What's really funny is these are the top 3 things people say they want. I want to fight when people take over accounts. I want to secure activities across multiple clouds. And I want to discover when people are doing things they're allowed to do, but in a bad way. So basically, a hijacked account or someone internally, let's say someone clicked a button inside, I think that came up. So someone clicked a button inside their account, their system started doing weird things. Was it taken over? No, it's still all inside on the PC, but they're doing things that user is allowed to do, but in a manner that any good behavioral analytics system should freak out and say, well, that's bad. So what's interesting to me here is these are the 3 things people ask us for, but the conversation always starts with log management or a SIEM system. Our point of view here is that a SIEM system is probably not the right investment if this is what you're actually worried about. One of the reasons is all of these systems create gigs and gigs and gigs of logs. And if you want these 3 things, you need to get it on every single system you have and every cloud system you have. The massive amount of logs that would be, and then if you're actually paying for a SIEM system that is doing good analytics, astronomically expensive. I could almost implement every security tool that me and Behzad could imagine for the price of what it would take for some of those monthly service fees from a true SIEM analytics company. And then at the end of the day, all the SIEM system will really tell us is, yeah, something bad did happen. Right? It didn't block it, didn't stop it, didn't do anything, but you're right, something bad did happen. And at times that's great, right? Because they say attacks nowadays, I think the last one I saw was about 308 days that an average attack is in an environment before someone notices, right? So the whole goal to a SIEM system is to get that number down. But it's to get that number down, not to prevent it in the first place. When people say these are the 3 things I'm worried about, it should be more about preventing these things in the first place, not just shortening the window of when you're notified of it or when you're able to notice it. And so when we look at these 3 things, we say, okay, well, what should someone have done if they're worried about this? And what's interesting is almost all 3 of these are some combination of the same few things. Multi-factor authentication, SSO, cloud app security or a CASB-like system, integrated security access control, as well as API-driven cloud app security. So I'm going to add that last one here and relate that to the coronavirus. You take everybody and you have them go home, okay? I think, Mark, I'm going to pick on you. You said split tunneling and whether you should do it or not. And so one thing to keep in mind, if you went to a cloud application, right? If you went to 365, that takes a lot of bandwidth. And if you take everybody and say, go home to your fast internet, everybody come back to my internet, and then we're going to loop you through again. So basically everything has to traverse at least twice, if not 3 times in that pattern. It's never going to happen, and those applications aren't going to work. And you're going to have people saying, if they have someone like Bill, who's making 60 meg PowerPoints, right, that everyone's going to try to open, if that's a small one. But when you think about that, if you're going to have something like that and then have it go through not split tunneling on your firewall, it'll never happen in reality. You'll never get enough bandwidth for that. Or it will work, but your users will be so ticked off, then it becomes IT won't let me work from home because it just doesn't work right. Okay, and that's not really what we want to get, and it's not really useful. And so what we have to worry about in that is assume we can't make them VPN in. We can't do full tunneling because it's just not practical. People can't afford to have, the 10, 20 gigs of internet that you would need just for that purpose. And so what we have to kind of give up is this next piece here, which is the old thinking versus the new thinking. So on the old thinking, everything was behind a firewall. You controlled it all. You could have control, you could have logs, you could have SIEM, and those things could actually do something useful because you controlled every single bit of it. On the right side, we have the new thinking, which is you've got distributed access from devices, homes, the offices, and you're not really in control. You can't get logs from all of those systems. And the more advanced the cloud system is, the less they want to give you those logs. And so you have to adapt to it. So when I mentioned on the previous slide API-driven cloud app security, one of the things you're looking for there is that you really don't control if you're going to have everybody work from home from the coronavirus, or if you just have an executive team, right? They're going to have tablets. They're going to have phones. You're going to say only use your work laptop. They're going to say okay, and then call into the help desk saying that they're on their iPad at the airport and they want to play with the file for the board and go fix it. And so as these things expand, what API-driven security gives you is the fact that you're acknowledging you don't control the endpoints, but you want security anyway. Okay, so let's say, I saw somebody with an iPad here. Yeah, okay. And so with the iPad as an example, right, most people don't have antivirus on it. iPads are one of the fastest growing operating systems that get viruses, but nobody ever has antivirus running on it that we've run into. That's going to hook into your 365. Your 365 is going to be fully encrypted as a user hits it to go from 365 to that endpoint to every other endpoint they hook it up with. Right? So if it's OneDrive, you're replicating whatever bad malware they gave you in a fully encrypted tunnel, hiding it from all your firewalls and traditional security until it drops on every other endpoint that CEO has, right, inside your network. And then when they go and double click it and run it, they're doing it completely inside your network from a quote unquote safe source. Cloud App Security's goal is to sit there and say, okay, we don't want that to happen. We can't control all the endpoints. We give up. We can't afford to buy enough phones and iPads for everybody in every business. It just costs too much. But we still need to secure it. And so when we're doing it at the API level, what that means is if Aaron is on a home system, he's passed through his multi-factor authentication, he's in his OneDrive, or he's in his Teams site, or he's in just his email, but it's an unsecured iPad. What the Cloud App Security is going to do is say, okay, as soon as he tries to save that into his OneDrive, when it's working at the API level, it says, I don't need to be in front of it. I don't need to be a gateway like an old email spam system. I don't need to have an antivirus client. As soon as he starts interfacing with, whether it be Salesforce, Dropbox, Box, 365, as soon as that file's set, it's basically like doing old-fashioned server-side antivirus, even though you're fully in the cloud and you don't control any of it because it's controlled by Microsoft or whoever else. So that's what Cloud App Security is for, and that's why it's really relevant in terms of things like pandemics, because if you really have to blow out who can get to what and where they can be is kind of anywhere, what we find is most people want Office. They want email. They want to open their documents. They want to pass spreadsheets with people. That's pretty common. And nowadays, to say, let's balloon our VDI deployment to cover our entire workforce, it's not so practical anymore. It costs a lot. There's a lot of bandwidth involved. So what we like to say there is that uncontrolled people, devices, and disparate applications are why CAS starts becoming more important than doing a SIEM system. And so to relate this back to what's the correct investment, well, what are you worried about? Are you worried about things like this? Because a SIEM really isn't going to help you. If you are, you should be looking at CAS. And one of the things that we like to tell people is, if you put the right building blocks in place, then by the time you're ready for a SIEM again, it'll actually do something useful, right? You want to make sure that that SIEM looks at the fewest number of really high quality logs to give you good data. You don't want a SIEM to sit there and hash through hundreds of tons of very low quality logs, because then your signal to noise ratio is just going to be out of whack. So to pick on Cloud App Security, another piece here that I kind of jumped off of, which is, as everyone works from home, think about how that sharing is going to go up, right? Think about who the people in your organization deal with and the fact that they're working from home, and more people are going to say, let me share this file, let me share this folder, what am I going to do with it? And then you don't control any of those endpoints. I've got a lot of clients that sit there and they say, okay, well, we shared out our Teams site to our clients so that they could just drop the files to us, right? It's a very convenient method for that. Or the SharePoint Online site. That's another big risk situation, right? You got a nice SSL tunnel from that unknown person dumping straight into your document libraries, and then all of your staff viewing it as a completely safe area, because it's the area IT gave them. It's supposed to be safe. So that's another piece where Cloud App Security, in this situation we're talking about, becomes much more useful than, let's say, a traditional SIEM. But again, all depends on what your goals are and what you want to get out of it. I can tell you that a lot of people are worried about ACH wire transfer fraud. And let's face it, you're about to tell people to go work from home. So the ability to run down the hall and say, did you send me this? Pretty much just disappeared, right? Almost all ACH wire transfer fraud that we deal with it a lot, and I got to tell you, it hurts the nonprofits and small businesses more than anybody wants to talk about. It's all the little guys that are getting hit. And it always starts with an account that was taken over. Not a clandestine malware or hack or anything like that. It's people forgot their passwords or lost their passwords and someone tapped into that email account. And so that account has been taken over. And that's pretty much how all of those start. They also start with phishing attacks. What we've seen is most people are really catching on to the bad phishing attacks. So when we find out that it's been successful and someone has mispaid someone or basically fallen victim to it, when we track it back, it's almost always from a legitimate account takeover issue. And your SIEM isn't going to help with that. But your risk of that damaging your company is now through the roof, and working from home is going to make that worse.